Lance does not do that. He doesn't use the word time. He uses a different word for time, which is fallout. Fallout has certain implications to it. Fallout is a word we use when we're talking about war, nuclear war or something like that. And fallout is something when we're talking about, that we use a way to describe time, when we're talking about victims. So he is framing this issue by describing himself as a victim through this one word, kind of changing the way that time is talked about. Just a very subtle thing. And look at how he reinforces that with words like heavy. Heavier than I thought. So that's one thing. That's one way that he does it. So you have a feeling that he's trying to pass off his, instead of confessing and saying sorry, that he's trying to blame it on something else or whatever. This is maybe one way that he's actually doing that linguistically that you could look at by describing it and framing it in this way. Well, here's another bit of the transcript. You can notice that starting again with the fallout has been heavy, heavier than I thought. The way that I told my story, when he was talking to Oprah, I guess she was kind of hard on him. And then he's still going on with this, talking about how brutal it was. And you notice in this section above this blue line where he's describing this difficult fallout, and you can say that's a kind of a victim narrative or kind of a way to describe himself as a victim. He's using a bunch of these words. So these actually turn out to be pretty interesting because they don't show up anywhere else in the transcript, just in this little section. And he's speaking slower here and using these uhs. Now, we can't get inside of his head and know exactly what he was thinking. We can't say, well, he's using because he was thinking hard, or he's using because he was uncomfortable. We can say that people do use a lot when they're thinking really hard about something and when they are possibly uncomfortable. And there's a multitude of related kind of things like that, right? So your speech is slower and you seem to be kind of pausing and filling it in with these to kind of show that you're really being careful about the words that you use. Well, what we can say is that he is at least displaying that. So all we have is the data. We can't psychologize and look in his head, but we can say he's displaying that he's being uncomfortable, that he's feeling uncomfortable or thinking really hard about what he's saying. He's displaying that through his words. So this is a really important linguistic device that he uses here. It shows the audience not just that he's a victim. He can tell us that this is fallout and it was brutal and it was heavy. He can use those words to describe it, but he can also do that through these other means, like using to show that he's actually struggling with his speech as he's telling us something that he's struggled through. So the speech itself indexes the victimhood. The way he's talking about it indexes what he's talking about, this being a victim of circumstance or something else like that, that it wasn't his individual action of using drugs, but it was something else that made him a victim to the circumstance. So you can see how he's strategically crafting this interview to get people on his side. So right after this blue line, he quits using If you look at the video, he starts talking faster. He's using more gesture at this point, and he starts talking about his family, especially his kids. My biggest fear is that I'd have the day when one of my older kids, talking about his kids, right? And one interesting linguistic thing he does, besides talking faster and not using is he doesn't just talk about his kids. Like when he says you'd have that day where a 13-year-old or 15-year-old would come home and just be in pieces, right? Be crying and stuff. He doesn't just describe them. Then all of a sudden he steps into them. So through his speech, he actually speaks for his children at this point. Dad, I heard this in the hall, or I read this on social media, or is this true? So he's actually speaking hypothetically in the place of his kids. He's projecting his voice onto his kids. Now that gives us some interesting evidence from his perspective that, first of all, if you're talking about your kids, you don't want to appear